Imagine a day when over 1 billion hearts beat in unison, men, women, and children across continents, all united by an ancient story that began with a dream. The streets are filled with joy, the homes with laughter, and the air carries the aroma of shared meals and deep gratitude. But beneath the celebration lies something far more profound than festivity. It's a story of trust that defied logic, a test that pierced the soul, and a sacrifice that forever shaped the legacy of faith. This is Eid al-Adha, the festival of sacrifice. But to truly understand its meaning, we must peel back the layers of time and journey into the life of a man chosen not just to believe, but to surrender. A man whose unwavering heart became the cornerstone of 3 major religions. His name was Ibrahim, and what he was asked to do would challenge every human instinct. Prophet Ibrahim was not just any believer. He was the friend of God, Khalilullah, a man who broke idols as a child and stood against his own people for the sake of divine truth. But perhaps the most defining moment of his life came not in his youth or in front of kings, but within the quiet chambers of his sleep. One night, he saw a dream. In it, he was sacrificing his beloved son, Ismail. Dreams of prophets are not like ordinary dreams. They are revelations, commands from the Almighty. Yet imagine the weight of such a dream. A father asked to take the life of his own child. Not because the child was wicked, not because it was punishment, but because Allah, in His divine wisdom, had ordained it as a test. Ibrahim could have doubted, he could have questioned, but he didn't. Instead, he reflected, submitted, and prepared himself for what seemed humanly impossible. The beauty of this moment lies not only in the command, but in the response it drew. Ibrahim turned to his son Ismail and told him of the dream, seeking his input, not because he doubted the command, but because he respected his son's will. And Ismail, a young boy with immense courage and devotion, responded not with fear or protest, but with faith that would echo through the ages. "O my father, do what you are commanded. You will find me, if Allah wills, among those who are patient." These words didn't come from a heart of blind obedience, but from one nurtured in trust, raised by a prophet and guided by divine light. It was not just Ibrahim who was being tested, it was Ismail too. Together, they became a symbol of shared submission, a bond between father and son, rooted in love for the Creator more than love for each other. And so they walked together to the place of sacrifice. With each step, Ibrahim's heart must have trembled, not out of doubt, but out of awe for the task ahead. As he laid his son down and prepared to fulfill the command, the moment became charged with the weight of history. It was at that final instant, when the blade was at Ismail's throat, that Allah called out. The command had been fulfilled, the test passed, and a ram was sent in place of Ismail. What was required was never the blood, it was never the act, it was the intention, the submission, the willingness to give up that which one holds most dear for the sake of Allah. This moment didn't just define the life of Ibrahim, it carved its way into the heart of Islamic belief. Every Eid al-Adha, Muslims across the globe remember this legacy, not with sadness, but with reverence. Because it wasn't about loss, it was about the triumph of faith. And this is where the story of Eid truly begins. Not with an animal, not with meat, but with the powerful idea that to truly believe is to trust Allah's plan, even when it hurts, even when it makes no sense, even when the world would call you mad. Eid al-Adha reminds every believer that real faith begins where comfort ends, and that sometimes the greatest sacrifice is surrender. And so, the moment arrives, the moment where heaven watches, the angels hold their breath, and the world witnesses a level of submission that shakes the earth. Prophet Ibrahim leads his young son Ismail to a quiet place, away from the eyes of others, away from distraction, away from the noise of the world. It is not just a walk of sacrifice, it is a walk of absolute trust. A father and son, side by side, their footsteps echoing the heartbeat of faith. Can you imagine what must have been going through Ibrahim's mind? Every parent knows the depth of love they feel for their child. Every hug, every moment of laughter, every sleepless night spent in care, all of it builds a bond that words fail to describe. And now, this very child, whom Ibrahim had longed for, prayed for, and finally received after many years, is the one he is being asked to part with. Yet, there is no rebellion in his heart, no resistance in his soul. Not because he doesn't love Ismail, but because he loves Allah more. The very foundation of faith is being laid here, not by words, not by books, but by action, raw and pure. This is what it means to believe. To surrender not only your body, but your deepest emotions, your strongest attachments, your most sacred bonds. As they reach the place of sacrifice, Ismail, strong in heart and resolute in faith, lies down, facing the ground, ready for what's to come. And Ibrahim, the friend of God, lifts the blade, prepared to complete the command. But at that very moment, a voice calls out from the heavens, "O Ibrahim, you have fulfilled the vision." Allah sends down a ram to be sacrificed in place of Ismail, revealing that it was never his intention for the child to die. The real offering was already made, the offering of obedience. It wasn't blood that Allah wanted. It was proof that a human being could rise above desire, above fear, and above all earthly attachment in pursuit of divine love. That a father could say, "My Lord comes first." That a son could say, "Let the will of Allah be done." This was the ultimate submission. A moment so powerful, so charged with spiritual electricity, that it would be remembered forever. It would become the foundation of Eid-ul-Adha, a day not of mourning, but of triumph. A celebration not of sacrifice in the sense of loss, but sacrifice in the sense of elevation. Because what Ibrahim and Ismail offered that day was not flesh. It was the human will bent lovingly in worship to the Creator. And what makes this even more extraordinary is the quietness of it all. There were no crowds, no applause, no fame, just a father, a son, and God, in a lonely place where hearts were laid bare and tested. And it is precisely because it was done for no one else, no show, no ego, no reward, that Allah made this moment eternal. Now every year, as Muslims around the world offer their own sacrifices, they are spiritually connected to that sacred scene. The act of sacrificing an animal on Eid-ul-Adha is not just symbolic. It is a reenactment, a chance to step into the legacy of Ibrahim, to feel, even in the smallest measure, what it means to give up something precious for Allah's sake. To remember that nothing in this world should stand between you and your Creator, not your wealth, not your comfort, not even your own family. But the question then arises, what is the deeper meaning behind this sacrifice? Why do Muslims continue to perform this act today, so many centuries after that divine moment? The answer lies not in the action itself, but in what it represents. Sacrifice in Islam is not a matter of ritual alone. It's a mindset, a worldview, a spiritual discipline. The animal that is sacrificed is not the end, it's the beginning. It serves as a mirror to the self. What are you holding on to that you need to let go of? What part of your ego must die so that your soul can live? The sacrifice of Eid al-Adha is a reminder that true devotion demands more than lip service. It demands giving up what you love for something greater. When a Muslim offers a goat or sheep or cow on this day, the act is accompanied by the name of Allah. Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. In the name of God, God is the greatest. These words are not casual, they are sacred. They are a declaration that life itself belongs to the Creator, that all blessings come from Him, that the life being taken is a trust, and that the one offering it acknowledges their complete dependence on divine mercy. And it must be said, Islam does not glorify blood or violence. In fact, the Quran makes it crystal clear in Surah Al-Hajj, verse 37. It is neither their meat nor their blood that reaches Allah, but it is your piety that reaches Him. This one verse cuts to the very heart of the matter. Allah does not need the physical sacrifice. He is not enriched by it. What matters to Him is the sincerity with which the act is done. This is why the act of Qurbani is so much more than the outward ritual. It's about checking your heart. Are you doing it because others are doing it? Because it's expected of you? Or are you doing it to draw closer to Allah, to renew your commitment, to purify your intentions? The animal you sacrifice could very well be a metaphor for your pride, your greed, your laziness, or your anger. And unless you are ready to let those things go, the ritual remains incomplete. That's why, in Islamic tradition, scholars often remind us that if your sacrifice on Eid al-Adha doesn't change you internally, you've missed the point. The Prophet Muhammad once said, Allah does not look at your bodies or your appearances, but He looks at your hearts and your deeds. On Eid, the sacrifice is meant to be a deed of the heart, an outward sign of an inner reality. And there's another layer to this moment, one that touches the social fabric of the Muslim Ummah. The sacrifice isn't kept solely for the one who performs it. The meat is shared, 1/3 for the family, 1/3 for relatives and friends, and 1/3 for the poor. This division reflects the values of balance, compassion, and equity. It ensures that the joy of Eid is not restricted to the wealthy. It reaches the hungry, the orphaned, the stranger. In fact, for many in impoverished areas of the world, Eid al-Adha may be the only time of year they taste meat. So the act of Qurbani becomes not only a sacrifice to God, but a service to humanity. It becomes a moment where spiritual elevation meets social justice. When you put all these layers together, the historical, the spiritual, the emotional, the communal, you begin to see Eid al-Adha for what it truly is. It is a festival of faith, born from one of the most powerful stories ever told. It is a day when Muslims are reminded that belief is not just about what you say, it's about what you're willing to give up. That every single blessing in life, no matter how cherished, must be held with open hands, not clenched fists. Because at the end of the day, nothing belongs to us. Our children, our wealth, our time, even our own souls. They are all gifts from Allah, on loan for a short while. The sacrifice of Ibrahim is a timeless lesson in how to return those gifts, with grace, with gratitude, and with unwavering trust in the one who gave them. And so when the call to prayer echoes through the morning air on Eid, and Muslims gather to remember, pray, and offer their sacrifice, they are stepping into a legacy of love and surrender that began in the deserts of Arabia, but stretches across time and place. They are saying, in their own quiet way, "Here I am, O Allah, willing to let go, willing to trust, willing to sacrifice." And in that moment, the story of Ibrahim becomes more than a story. It becomes alive in every heart that dares to believe. In a world that often glorifies material gain and surface appearances, where spiritual sincerity is drowned out by rituals performed without reflection, a single verse from the Quran pierces through the noise like lightning, through a darkened sky. It is neither their meat nor their blood that reaches Allah, but it is your piety that reaches Him. Surah Al-Hajj, verse 37. These words are not just divine instruction, they are revelation in its purest form, exposing the heart of worship. Allah, the Most High, makes it absolutely clear that He does not need the flesh or blood of the animal. He is not in want of anything. He is free of need, while we are the needy ones. The sacrifice is not for Him, it is for us. It is a test of sincerity, of the soul's willingness to detach from materialism and to embrace complete submission. The very meat and blood we offer during Qurbani are merely shadows of something deeper. It is the taqwa, the God consciousness, the humility, the recognition of who we are before our Creator that is accepted by Allah. Without this inner awareness, the act is hollow, no different than a meaningless tradition. This profound verse shifts the entire conversation around Eid ul-Adha. It tells us that our focus must not be on the physical act, but on the spiritual state that drives it. A person might spend thousands on the most expensive animal, but if their heart is filled with pride, arrogance, or the desire to show off, that sacrifice becomes void in the eyes of Allah. On the other hand, someone who sacrifices with limited means, but with a heart trembling in love and reverence for Allah, such a person's Qurbani is weightier than mountains. This is the divine scale, not quantity, not show, but sincerity. This is why the act of sacrifice must be preceded by reflection. Who are you doing this for? Is it to impress the community, to follow a trend, or is it because you feel the weight of Ibrahim's legacy and wish to honor it with your own heart and hands? And let's not forget that the Prophet Muhammad, the seal of the prophets and the mercy to mankind, also emphasized the inward dimension of sacrifice. He would make Qurbani not only on behalf of himself and his family, but also on behalf of those in his ummah who could not afford to do so. This act wasn't just a gesture, it was a demonstration of the deep mercy and interconnectedness that Islam calls for. Sacrifice in Islam is not selfish, it is deeply communal. Even when it is personal, it must carry within it the concern for others. The Prophet reminded his companions that a true believer is one who loves for his brother what he loves for himself. What then is the meaning of Eid ul-Adha if the poor in your town are left hungry while your table overflows with meat? This brings us to the next layer of sacrifice, the process itself and how it is meant to be performed. It begins after the special congregational prayer of Eid, when families come together in remembrance of Allah, offering takbir, praising the Almighty for His guidance and mercy. After the prayer, those who are financially able begin the act of Qurbani. The animal, be it sheep, goat, cow or camel, is selected with care. It must be healthy, free from defects, treated with kindness and dignity. Islam is not a religion that promotes brutality or careless killing. On the contrary, the Prophet commanded the believers to show ihsan, excellence, even in slaughter. He said, "Verily, Allah has prescribed excellence in everything. So when you kill, kill well, and when you slaughter, slaughter well. Let each of you sharpen his blade and spare suffering to the animal." This hadith is a stunning example of Islam's ethics in action. Even in the moment of taking a life, compassion and responsibility are required. The person performing the sacrifice utters the name of Allah. Bismillah, Allahu Akbar. In the name of God, God is the greatest. These words are not mere utterances. They are affirmations. They acknowledge that this act is not done out of ownership or power, but as a sacred trust. The life of this animal is a gift, and returning it to the Creator must be done with solemn awareness. The Quran states, and the cattle he has created for you. In them there is warmth and numerous benefits, and of them you eat. Surah An-Nahl 5. These animals are not commodities. They are creations of Allah, serving humanity by His command. When they are sacrificed, it is not a loss, but a transition from one form of service to another. Their meat will feed families. Their story will teach hearts. Their place in the ritual will elevate souls. After the sacrifice is completed, the meat is divided. This is where Islam's social justice emerges with striking clarity. 1/3 of the meat is kept for the family. 1/3 is given to friends and neighbors. And the final third is reserved for the poor and needy. This structured distribution reflects the values Islam cherishes: balance, connection, generosity. No one is left out. No one is forgotten. It is not enough to worship in isolation. Your sacrifice must ripple outward, touching lives beyond your own. For the wealthy, this may be a reminder that their abundance is a trust. For the middle class, it becomes a moment of community unity. For the poor, it brings joy and relief, perhaps their only meat in months. In this system, sacrifice becomes more than an act. It becomes a vehicle of mercy, a tool of dignity, and a cure for selfishness. But the beauty of this act lies not just in its structure, but in its timing. The sacrifice is performed during the days of Eid-ul-Adha, which coincide with the final rites of Hajj, the annual pilgrimage to Mecca. At the very time that pilgrims are standing in the sacred lands, casting stones at the pillars that represent Shaitan, affirming their rejection of evil and their commitment to God, Muslims across the globe are performing sacrifices in their own lands, their own neighborhoods, their own homes. There is a spiritual bridge being formed. While the pilgrims shed their ego and sins in the desert heat, the rest of the Ummah joins in, not physically, but spiritually, performing their own mini-Hajj by way of sacrifice. This creates a unity across the Ummah that defies geography. You may be in Cairo, Kuala Lumpur, Lagos, London, or a remote village in Bangladesh. Yet you are connected to Mecca, to Ibrahim, to Ismail, and to every believer who stands before God with a heart open and willing to give. And this brings us to the deeper reflection. What is your sacrifice this year? Is it just an animal? Or is there something within you that needs to be offered on the altar of submission? Maybe it's your anger that you've been holding on to. Maybe it's a grudge that poisons your soul. Maybe it's your addiction to wealth, your obsession with status, your ego that refuses to admit fault. Eid-ul-Adha calls each one of us to ask, what am I willing to let go of for Allah's sake? Because if all we do is perform a ritual without internal transformation, then we have not truly honored the legacy of Ibrahim. Let's not forget, this entire story began with a dream that was followed by action. And that action was accepted by God because it came from a heart fully surrendered. That is the gold hidden in the folds of Eid-ul-Adha. It is not about blood. It is about belief. It is not about meat. It is about meaning. And as the blades are sharpened, as the takbirs rise, and as the meat is shared from home to home, soul to soul, the message of Ibrahim lives on. True faith demands sacrifice. True love for Allah asks us to give up what we hold most dear. But in that giving, we don't lose. We gain. We gain nearness to the most merciful. We gain purification of our hearts. And we gain the blessings that descend only upon those who are sincere. So as the sun rises on Eid morning and the streets fill with smiles, let every believer remember that behind the joy is a challenge. Behind the celebration is a covenant. And behind the feast is a fire-tested faith. The test of Ibrahim was not placed in the Quran to be admired from a distance. It was placed there so we could walk that path in our own way every year. Not with stones or swords or fire, but with humility, gratitude, and the willingness to surrender. Because that is the essence of sacrifice, and that is the true spirit of Eid. Far away from the bustling cities, in the barren plains of Arabia, millions of people converge every year for one of the most sacred acts of worship in Islam, the pilgrimage of Hajj. For many, this journey is a once-in-a-lifetime calling, a physical and spiritual transformation unlike any other. But for those who do not make the journey, there's a profound connection that still links them to this holy event. That connection is Eid al-Adha. The festival of sacrifice doesn't stand apart from Hajj. It is woven into its very fabric. Both trace their roots back to the same towering figure in history, Prophet Ibrahim. Just as the pilgrims reenact the actions of Ibrahim and his family through rituals like the sa'i between Safa and Marwa, the stoning of the pillars symbolizing Shaitan, and standing at Arafat in utter submission, Muslims around the world mirror his legacy through the act of Qurbani. The synchrony between the global celebration of Eid and the final days of Hajj serves as a spiritual unifier. Whether you're standing in the shade of the Kaaba or praying from your local masjid thousands of miles away, you are part of a single living tradition, a river of devotion that flows back to the same origin. There's something deeply moving about the fact that Eid al-Adha reaches its climax on the 10th of Dhul Hijjah, immediately after the most spiritually intense day of Hajj, the day of Arafah. On that day, the pilgrims gather on the plain of Arafat, standing before Allah in tears, raising hands that tremble in repentance, seeking forgiveness, renewal, and nearness to their Creator. No walls, no status, no distractions, just the soul laid bare. It's a day when sins are erased and hearts are reborn. And just as they finish this immense act of devotion, the next morning dawns with the spirit of Eid. It's as if the sacrifice offered in homes and fields across the world is an echo of the spiritual sacrifice offered on the plains of Arafah. The two acts, though physically separate, are spiritually intertwined, bound together by divine mercy and the remembrance of Prophet Ibrahim's trust. But the experience of Eid al-Adha is not limited to history, rituals, or even the sacrifice itself. It extends into the very fabric of community life. One of the most beautiful and powerful dimensions of this day is the emphasis on sharing. The meat of the sacrificed animal isn't meant to sit in freezers or become symbols of excess. It is meant to be distributed, to nourish the hungry, to reconnect with loved ones, and to remind the wealthy that their privilege is a responsibility. Islam does not celebrate alone, it celebrates together. The act of dividing the meat into three parts, one for the family, one for relatives and friends, and one for the poor, is not merely a guideline, it is a principle of balance. It ensures that no one is forgotten. It breaks down walls of class and status and forces the hand of generosity. Imagine for a moment a young orphan in a remote village who hasn't tasted meat in months, maybe years. For that child, the arrival of Eid al-Adha is not just a religious holiday. It is a day of joy, a day of nourishment, a day of hope. It tells him that somewhere out there, someone remembered him, someone cared enough to share. And this cycle of generosity continues year after year. For the elderly widow living alone, for the refugee who fled with nothing, for the family silently struggling behind closed doors, Eid al-Adha becomes a lifeline. It is compassion in motion. And the beauty of this act is that it's not performative. No one needs to know your name. The meat is not labeled with personal glory. The reward is with Allah alone. This is the kind of charity that Islam encourages. Quiet, sincere, and healing. And it's not just the poor who benefit. Sharing meat with neighbors and relatives revives the bonds of kinship. It bridges gaps created by misunderstandings or distance. When you knock on someone's door with a fresh portion of Qurbani meat, you're not just giving food. You're extending a hand of connection. You're saying, "You matter to me. I see you. I remember you." These small acts, multiplied across millions of households, create a wave of unity that washes over communities, towns, and nations. In a time when loneliness, isolation, and division are spreading like disease, Eid al-Adha brings the cure in the form of shared meals and open hearts. But there's another, often overlooked dimension to this day. It's the sense of humility that comes with recognizing how small we are and how great Allah's mercy is. When a believer participates in Qurbani, they're reminded that life is fragile, that everything we have is temporary, and that gratitude is not just an emotion, it's a duty. When you stand over an animal about to be sacrificed and you say, "Bismillah, Allahu Akbar," you're not only performing a ritual, you're bearing witness. You're acknowledging that life and death are in Allah's hands and that He is the ultimate owner of all things. This realization humbles the soul. It softens the heart. It teaches us that power does not lie in wealth or control, but in surrender. And from this place of humility rises something even more profound: contentment. Eid al-Adha reminds us to be content, not because we have everything, but because we know that whatever we have has been given by the one who knows what is best. The spirit of this Eid is not about extravagance. It's not about dressing better than others, throwing the largest parties, or showcasing one's sacrifice. It's about returning to the essence. It's about celebrating the fact that you are a servant of Allah, and in that service there is freedom. That you are part of a tradition that values mercy over pride, sincerity over show, and giving over receiving. When seen through this lens, the entire day becomes a tapestry of spiritual lessons. The Eid prayer that begins the morning is not just a ritual, it is a declaration that Allah is greater than anything we face, greater than our struggles, greater than our fears, greater than our attachments. As the takbir rings out, echoing from minarets and living rooms alike, it shakes the soul awake. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah, Allahu Akbar, Walillahil hamd. These words are not new, but on Eid, they feel different. They are heavier, fuller, as if the entire universe is joining in the chorus, proclaiming that on this day, all praise belongs to the Creator. And after the prayer, as families gather, as meals are prepared and shared, as stories are told and laughter fills the air, the spirit of Eid becomes visible. Children receive gifts, elders are honored, and neighbors are embraced. But again, it is not the material joy that defines the day. It is the presence of barakah, of divine blessing, that can be felt in the smiles, in the shared bites, in the warm hands extended in greeting. Eid al-Adha at its core is a day of restoration. It restores our relationship with Allah, reminding us that He sees our efforts and rewards our sincerity. It restores our bonds with each other, healing wounds that may have gone unnoticed. And it restores our connection with our own souls, bringing us back to what truly matters. So while the act of sacrifice may take just a few moments, its impact stretches across lifetimes. It plants seeds in hearts. It builds bridges in communities. It echoes the call of Ibrahim, who stood alone but stood firm, proving that one heart in surrender is more powerful than 1,000 hearts in rebellion. And every year, when Eid al-Adha comes again, that call is renewed. It calls on us to reflect, to sacrifice, to share, to serve. It calls on us to rise above selfishness and comfort and embrace the deeper meaning of faith. Because true sacrifice isn't just about what you give up, It's about what you become in the process. And so, as millions around the world gather, as hands reach out to give and receive, and as hearts remember the moment that changed history, the moment when a father was ready to sacrifice his son and a son was ready to be sacrificed, we are reminded once again that love for Allah demands action. It demands courage. It demands sacrifice. But in return, it gives something priceless: closeness to the one who never forgets, never fails, and never stops giving. And that, more than anything, is why Eid al-Adha is not just a celebration. It's a revival of the soul, a revival of the spirit, and a revival of the eternal bond between the believer and the Most Merciful. Every year when the echoes of Eid al-Adha return to the hearts of believers, they do not come alone. They bring with them an ancient whisper that reverberates through time, a reminder of what it truly means to believe. Beneath the surface of animal sacrifices, joyful gatherings, and shared meals lies a deeply spiritual truth: that the greatest act of worship is not in what you do with your hands, but what you offer with your heart. Eid al-Adha isn't simply a day to commemorate a historic event. It is an invitation to participate in a living tradition of inner transformation. It's a divine mirror that asks each of us to look within and ask, what am I willing to sacrifice for the sake of my Creator? What habits, attachments, or comforts am I clinging to that block my growth in faith? Because the most meaningful sacrifice isn't always the one on the outside. Often, it's the one no one sees, the one that takes place in the silence of your own soul. For some, that sacrifice may be pride, the refusal to forgive, the insistence on being right, the walls built from ego that isolate the heart from softness. For others, it may be greed, an addiction to accumulating more, always more, even when others go without. For many, it's fear. Fear of surrender, fear of uncertainty, fear of letting go of control. Yet the legacy of Ibrahim and Ismail reminds us that nothing truly valuable comes without cost. When Ibrahim was asked to sacrifice his son, it wasn't because Allah needed blood. It was because Ibrahim needed to rise. He needed to demonstrate, both to himself and the world, that his faith was not conditional. That he didn't just believe when life was easy, when the path was clear, or when the reward was immediate. No, his belief was rooted in trust. A trust so deep that he walked into the unknown with his most precious gift and still said, "Yes, my Lord, I am yours." That kind of faith doesn't happen by accident. It's cultivated. It's earned. And Eid al-Adha brings that opportunity to every believer, to step into that same space of surrender in whatever way their life demands. Maybe for one person, it means reconciling with a family member after years of silence. Maybe for another, it's letting go of a grudge that has poisoned their heart. For someone else, it may be breaking free from a sin they've become comfortable with, even though they know it's pulling them away from Allah. The truth is, we all have an Ismail, something or someone we hold dearly. And Eid al-Adha asks us, would you be willing to place that on the altar if Allah asked? Would you trust that letting go would not leave you empty, but instead open a door to something far greater? And the miracle is, when you do let go for the sake of Allah, He replaces it with something better. Just as He replaced Ismail with a ram, He replaces fear with peace, resentment with love, and emptiness with fulfillment. But only when the sacrifice is sincere, only when it comes from a place of devotion, not obligation. That's why the spirit of Eid is not confined to a single day. Its essence should continue long after the celebration ends. The meat is consumed, the gatherings disperse, but the lessons remain. Because the goal isn't to perform an annual ritual, the goal is to grow, to transform, to come out of Eid ul-Adha closer to Allah than you were before. That's the real victory. That's the real joy. And while the inner journey is deeply personal, the outer expression of Eid ul-Adha is no less significant. It is, without question, a day of celebration. But it's not a celebration of self. It's a celebration of obedience, of divine mercy, of the triumph of faith over fear. Families wake early, dress in their best clothes, and head to the mosque for a special congregational prayer. They raise their voices in takbir, glorifying Allah and acknowledging His greatness. The sound of Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, La ilaha illallah rises into the morning air, not as noise, but as a sacred declaration that God is greater, greater than our worries, our attachments, and our worldly distractions. And that very declaration becomes the heartbeat of the day. After prayer, homes come alive with laughter, hugs, and the sharing of food. Children run joyfully through hallways, guests are welcomed with open arms, and tables are adorned with dishes that carry both flavor and love. But what sets this celebration apart is that it's grounded in purpose. Every bite is more than food. It is a symbol of gratitude. Every gift is more than a gesture. It is a reflection of generosity. Every conversation carries the weight of remembrance. Eid ul-Adha transforms the mundane into the meaningful. It's a time when family bonds are repaired, when community wounds are healed, when neighbors become brothers and strangers are embraced as friends. And it's not just about the human interactions. On Eid, even nature becomes a part of the celebration. The animals that are sacrificed are treated with care, gentleness, and dignity. In Islam, cruelty to animals is never permitted. In fact, the Prophet Muhammad taught that whoever shows mercy to any creature on earth, Allah will show mercy to them on the Day of Judgment. This mercy is reflected in how the animals are selected, fed, and handled during Qurbani. They are not objects, they are creations of Allah, fulfilling a noble purpose. Their sacrifice becomes a shared offering, one that nourishes not just bodies, but hearts. And the meat is never hoarded. It is divided and distributed, turning the personal into the communal, the individual act into a social blessing. For the poor, Eid ul-Adha is more than a holiday. It is a day of dignity. When a package of meat arrives at their door, they are not made to feel like recipients of charity, but honored guests in a global celebration. They too partake in the blessings of Eid, not as spectators, but as full participants. And that is the brilliance of this tradition. It erases divisions. It reminds the wealthy that their wealth is a trust. It reminds the poor that they are not forgotten. And it reminds everyone that the greatest wealth is not in gold or possessions, but in a heart that gives for the sake of Allah. And as the sun begins to set on this sacred day, as families wind down and the streets grow quieter, a peaceful realization settles in. Eid ul-Adha is not just about one act of sacrifice. It is about a mindset, a way of living. It teaches that obedience to Allah brings peace, that generosity spreads joy, and that faith, when tested, becomes stronger. It teaches that in letting go, you receive. In giving, you gain. And in submitting to the will of Allah, you find a freedom that the world cannot offer. In the end, Eid ul-Adha is a reminder that the story of Ibrahim is not a story of the past. It is a story for every believer in every generation. His footsteps are not ancient, they are timeless. His trial was not meant to inspire fear, it was meant to inspire faith. And his sacrifice was not about loss, it was about love. A love so complete, so pure, that it changed the world. And every year, as the Ummah gathers to remember and to reenact that love, they are given a chance to renew their own. So when you walk away from this Eid, ask yourself, what did I sacrifice? What did I learn? What did I become? Because that is the true measure of the day. Not how much meat you collected, how many guests you hosted, or how beautiful your clothes were, but how deeply your heart surrendered, how much closer you came to your Creator, how sincerely you followed the path of Ibrahim. And if by the end of it all, your soul feels a little lighter, your heart a little softer, and your faith a little stronger, then you have truly celebrated Eid al-Adha, not just in body, but in spirit, not just for a day, but for a lifetime.